Hello everyone, welcome to the part 1 review of Alchemy of Souls. So this would just be the review of part 1. Let's get right into it. So first, Alchemy of Souls, if you've watched it, is a story about mages and the power that these mages have. There's also a major villain that the mages aren't really aware of but are slowly going to find stuff out about, investigate, and then hopefully destroy. But at the core of the story, aside from it being a story of fantasy and a story of magic and a story of fiction, is the developing romance between the female lead and the male lead. The female lead is an assassin, and in this story there's something called soul shifting, and she basically dies while she's trying to attack a group of mages because she's known as a shadow assassin. And then she meets a boy, let's call him a boy, and he is very weak. Like his kind of like spiritual energy have been closed off by his father, and they meet, and then she helps basically train him to become more powerful, and they develop a master-servant relationship. And due to this master-servant relationship, eventually, because they're so close together, they end up falling in love. And can I just say, I love the developing romance between Jang-uk and Moo-deok, whose assassin name is Naksu. So that's pretty much how I sum up this show, at least for part 1. That's how I would describe the plot. Although it's not just romance, like I said, there's so much more to it, like the mystery about how she, as somebody who has already died and gone into another body, can basically survive, because usually when somebody switches souls and switches bodies, they turn to stone and they die and they're gone, right? But there's a way, we find out in part 1, that she can basically obtain an ice stone, which will allow her to live forever. And the male lead, Jang-uk, is like, I'm gonna find the ice stone for her and help her live. And like, the way I grew like so much empathy for her character as the show has progressed, and how she's not just a soul shifter to me, she's a fully fleshed human being who I want to survive, and I want to see the romance between Jang-uk and Moo-deok. Like, I want them together. Like, I know her body was burnt, I know she's fully dead, but I want them together so badly. Like, I'm hoping part 2 explores their romance more. But like I said with the plot, it's, as much as it is about romance, it's also about like the mages, how the mage system works, the power that they hold in reference to the king as well. The king needs the mages, but the king also, in part, has, at least it appears in part 1, that the king has some measure of power. We don't really see it used much aside from by the crown prince, who also has power, but the mages are the ones that are like the more powerful ones, and some of them work for the palace, some of them work separately, and that's just something that we see develop in the show. Alongside this, the supporting roles, Seo Yul's character is very interesting. He actually met the female lead when they were children, and it takes him time to like realize that it's actually her, and he pretty much fell for her ages ago, and then when he realizes it's her, even though he knows that she's a soul shifter, he basically gets more empathy for her as time goes on. And it's really a beautiful sight to see, to be honest. Just seeing their relationship develop over time. He's a sweetheart. The only thing I'm going to say about his character is that I find him a little bit bland. I think he's written like that on purpose. Some of you may get second male lead syndrome with his character. I didn't as much, because I don't know, like the whole kind of like I'm trying to hide my feelings thing in characters and people in real life is kind of like not my vibe, but he's chill, you know. And then Gowon, who's the crown prince, is a really funny character. Like, he has a very interesting relationship with the female lead. he feels like she doesn't respect him, and she kind of doesn't, because she says and does whatever she wants to, because she spent so much of her life as a shadow assassin. She doesn't really care. And it's interesting to see their kind of like friendship kind of grow over time. He kind of has feelings for her too, but they both know nothing's really going to come of that, so it just ends up being like a little funny little thing. And then you also have Park Dang-gu, who is another really funny, interesting, kind of like dorky character, who kind of looks like a K-pop star. Like, he looks the most odd, like, out of the whole, like, at least the main supporting cast members. So that's really interesting. I love as well, like, the pacing of part 1. Like, we got to know all the important details on time. Like, by episode 7, we figured out why the female leads, basically her family, was assassinated. Well, not assassinated, but she thought they were assassinated, and we find out what actually happened, that her father was a soul shifter, and he killed her family, and that's why he was killed. And she also finds out that, like, the person that saved her and made her into an assassin was basically part of, like, a whole conspiracy with her father becoming a soul shifter. So basically, we begin off part 1 with a backstory on soul shifting, how it works, how it relates to them, and particularly how it relates to the male lead. So basically, the male lead's, well, not really his dad, but the person that he would call dad basically isn't actually his father. And he had a connection with the king, and the king and him basically swapped bodies. The king slept with his mother and told his dad, Jang Gang, that basically any child you have will be mine. So basically, he is the king's son but doesn't know it, and he's raised as like a major son, but he's not actually a major son, doesn't know it. This is the main reason why his spiritual energy is basically closed off. And we get introduced to that very early on in the show, and then as part 1 progresses, we learn more about the backstory, how it connects to the major plot about what the villains are trying to do. Like, the villains basically want to get the ice stone and gain control of the world, and all they want is power. Basically, they're simply driven by power and nothing else, and it's pretty simple. And then obviously on the opposing side are the good characters, which is the female lead and the male lead, who really are just trying to both gain power in their own ways as well, but for the benefit of, in the male lead's case, for the benefit of himself, to kind of prove to people that he is strong and powerful and good. And for the female lead, at least in part 1, her main goal was to get back to where she was, because when she shifts into her body, she's in a much weaker body than she was in previously, and her goal was also quite, like, I guess, selfish. But ultimately, when you're looking at their particular objectives compared to the villains, they're clearly on the good side. And if it ever comes in part 2 with like a battle between the villains and the good people, it's very clear that the good people will, I guess, do what they can to save the world against people that are trying to completely ruin things. I will, as well as the pacing, I love the CGI. It's good CGI to me. Like, I'm not very picky about CGI, but I do like the way things look in this show. I also like the costume design. I like the way things look. They're not using many different sets from what I can see in the show, but I still like the location wise, the setting. Like, it's really visually fun to watch. And the mixture of romance and comedy and fantasy in the show really works for me. And while it does have certain tropes, like, you know, the females going after the male lead, and even the female lead having her own kind of harem of men after her, it simply adds to the enjoyment of the show and is pretty fun. So I really like it. And I love the songs they're choosing and how they fit into particular scenes, particularly with the female lead and male lead, as they realize their feelings for each other, especially at the end of part 1, where they just admit they miss each other so much, because he basically he ends up gaining power and being able to go back into Songgrim, which is the place where he grew up, and they finally are going to let him harness his power, and she just wants to go back to him and just kind of serve him again, because even though they have a master-servant relationship, they've really kind of grown closer over time, and it's very beautiful relationship, beautiful dynamic, and I just love part one. And there's one character I haven't really talked about much that I want to talk about a little bit, which is Jin Cho-hyun. She's kind of sweet, like she's made mistakes for love, I guess, but she fixes them in the end, kind of thing, and she ends up being rather endearing, so I like her character. And then other funny characters are Park Jin, who is the leader of Songgrim, and also made Kim Doju. So yeah, I really like this show, and I really enjoyed it. And as somebody who's a romance fan and a fantasy fan, this really gives me everything that I want in a show, and I feel so much like joy and empathy for these characters. And I think a great part of great writing is allowing you to be entertained while also being able to pace a show really well, which I think it does well. Let me know what you thought of this show in the comments below, particularly part one. If you like my channel, please subscribe. If you like this video, please hit the like button below. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.